And that's been a big part of the scientific method, is just using goals and metrics to guide teams rather than focusing on exactly what projects you're going to work on, exactly the deliverables, because over time you're going to learn new things and you're going to want to adjust those roadmaps.
Dude, I was super excited. We're just going to hang out and talk today. Is that cool with you?
Cool. Perfect. Yeah. Likewise.
I'm actually a customer of Brex. I think it's, and one day I log in and the icon changed and that everything. And I was like, what is this? What's going on with that?
We did an entire redesign. So the Brex, I'd say that the Brex design was the one that was more or less from the beginning of the company. So the company's about 3.5 years old now. And we kind of looked a lot about the mission of the company, where we want to be, what do we want to focus on now that we're more than just a corporate credit card. And we decided to basically refresh our brand, our mission, and kind of focus on the financial operating system. And as part of that, we also redid the colors. We had kind of mixed feedback. Some people really loved the all black and orange, and some people felt that they wanted more lighter colors. There was too masculine, too strong. And so we kind of made some adjustments there and kind of changed the logo, changed the entire website, redesigned everything, changed the entire dashboard, changed the entire mobile app in the last few months.
Did the mission change at all?
Yeah, I mean, initially, I would say when I first joined, we didn't have a formal mission. It was mostly around building a corporate credit card for startups. So it was more about the product. And that's been a discovery process that the founders and the rest of the company have gone through over the last 12 months to kind of think about how we want to make an impact longer term. The founders are very long-term oriented. And so basically they wanted to say okay, we have these products, but realistically, how should we think about the company in the long run? What's the impact in the industry and in the world? And how do we kind of sum up together in the mission? Being a mission-driven company was important to them. A lot of their mentors strongly believe in that, and that's how they've run their companies. And so they spend a lot of time kind of doing the discovery process along with everybody in the company to focus on the financial operating system mission.
Nice. Now, when you were a small child, was this your dream to be financial software operating systems?
For me or for Brex?
For you.
For me, when I was young, I thought I would be playing video games.
Right.
I got my first computer when I was in kindergarten, which was pretty, I think, ahead of the time for Romania. I had an Apple II, and I was mostly playing video games. And then when I got my first PC, I kept playing video games, and then I got into hacking and kind of writing a bunch of exploits and focused on security. And then when I got to college, I was focused on systems and network administration. I thought that's what I want to do. And then I tried software development as part of an internship at Microsoft and really loved that. That's how I got into writing code. Then I was I worked on Azure, Office 365, all these cloud services. Payments was never on my radar until I discovered Stripe and fell in love with that. Got really deep on payments, and I said I would never do it again. Then I discovered Brex, fell in love with that, and then here we are now. So I would say no, wasn't the plan. Multiple times, I would say was not the plan, and eventually landed here.
What did you do at Stripe?
So at Stripe, I joined as an engineer, and I worked on their financial infrastructure. So basically all the, that's really how money moves. Basically, when you go on a website that uses Stripe and you want to pay with Stripe, I built all the rails that move the money, how we pay out the merchants there. And so I was pretty core in terms of all the systems. And then afterwards, I started focusing on their card present solution. Basically, how do we take it from purely digital and kind of build a platform for people that want to have not just online payments, but also in-store payments. So build a platform for that, did an acquisition for a company there called Index and kind of set it all up. And then I've always been by that point, obviously I was leading several teams, and I was really passionate about culture. And so I was also helping build distributed offices for Stripe. So I helped open Seattle since I used to live there before. And then I did a bunch of traveling to Dublin in Europe. And then I was setting up Singapore when I was leaving.
And so did that experience prepare you for your role at Brex?
Definitely. Definitely. So both in terms of kind of learning through a hyper growth company like Stripe. So I joined Stripe and it was about 100 people. And I joined Brex and it was about 50 people. And so there was a lot of learning. I was like, okay, we did that really well. We didn't do that. That was part of the culture. That wasn't part of the culture. Those are the things that we had to evolve. And then on the remote and distributed stuff, I had a pretty bad experience at Microsoft in terms of remote work. Both personally, my first year at Microsoft was in the Vancouver office because I couldn't stay in the US. So I was in the US for university and then went to Vancouver for a year and then moved back to the US because I couldn't get a work visa at the time. And I loved Vancouver, but I hated working from there. I was the only one working for my team remotely. It was just very, very hard. And then later, towards the end of my career at Microsoft, I was working with a team in Shanghai. A big part of the org was there. And so I was traveling a bunch of times. I think I did like I traveled 8 times in 1 year. And so I learned basically like what works and doesn't work with kind of having a distributed team. And then I applied that at Stripe as we wanted to go distributed. And then that was very, very useful in terms of how to set up things at Brex, in terms of like a distributed culture. When I joined Brex, everybody was in one office and literally would work around the office and you talk to people. And then we opened up Vancouver, then Salt Lake City, then New York, and now we're fully remote. So it's definitely been a very pleasant experience, but also one that I've been able to apply a lot of the stuff that I learned throughout the time at Microsoft and Stripe.
Were you already going remote at Brex and before COVID happened, or did that make that happen?
So we were going distributed. The plan was we'll start off with a few different offices and we'll have distributed teams. And then the plan was to go remote. But it was kind of the remote aspect where we'll have some people, maybe some engineers can work remotely. But for the most part, like if you think about leadership roles, if you think about majority of the people, they would have been in one of the offices that we had. And I think the biggest shift that we've made is changing the culture to be completely remote and enabling anybody to work from anywhere, basically North American time zones. And that required quite a lot of work throughout the year, which we had to do no matter what. And so we looked at it and we're basically like, if we are able to do that for a year, why can't we do it longer term and kind of give people the flexibility to live wherever they want? And that forced us to take a more longer term approach to how we operate, which will then, I think, pay off dividends as we started hiring people from all over the US and Canada.
Did the structure of your engineering teams change when the mission changed or no?
Not necessarily. I think in general, my approach with organizational structures is to find like team structures that have clear missions and goals and systems that they own. And over time, you adjust those. Like every 6 to 12 months, you make tweaks and adjustments rather than like we're massively changing the org. So when I first joined Brex, there were no teams. So I set up the initial org structure. Then in the fall of last year, when we launched Cash, we introduced that. And so we made a couple of changes there. And then earlier this year, we made another change to kind of split a couple of teams and create a couple of new teams. And everything else is more or less organic. So within the high level structure, you have other teams that got formed over time as the number of people increased, and you kind of have to make sure you have the right support for each of them.
When you went remote, was security like a tough problem to solve with everyone being at home?
I would say logistics for IT were hard. And so we already had things like VPN set up and YubiKeys. And so that was pretty smooth. It was mostly the logistics of, for people that are joining, how do you actually send them hardware? There were a bunch of backlogs for Apple, for example, so you couldn't get laptops in place. Even you could now, it's like you have to ship them. In the office, you had like a hardware lab where you can go get like a bunch of smaller things. Now you don't have that. So how do you enable people to purchase those? And this is where it's nice to be a company that builds a corporate credit card, because we're able to kind of actually evolve the product to enable people to do that. So for example, we decided that we want to give everybody some amount per month that they can spend on whatever they want towards work from home to make their experience better. You can do it on food, you can do it on laundry, on whatever you want, doesn't matter, internet. and we wanted people to use the product. So we actually added functionality in the product. We created like a stipend card that supports that. Similarly, now we've been evolving our hardware purchasing to enable people to buy things using their Brex card and make it reconcile really easily with like finance teams and tracking with budgets and all that. And so that's been very seamless from that perspective because we're able to change the product to accommodate for us, which hopefully translates in other people also getting the same benefits.
Yeah, did you notice your customers have any changing with like security because all of their people are now decentralized too?
Yeah, I think for a lot of our users that we've chatted with, that's been a bigger change. Because we've predominantly worked with smaller startups that were growing quite a lot. They were all basically where Brex was 1 or 2 years ago, where many of them were in that boat. And so we've worked, and I met with several of them to kind of talk through how to communicate efficiently, how to collaborate, what are some of the tools that we've used, both from a security perspective, but also from a communication, collaboration, and decision making. Like what are the different tools that we've been using successfully to enable people to work distributed. I think the hardest part with being remote is less about people being in different parts, but more about like time zones. How do you actually have the right balance? The situations for each person was very different. Some people were very comfortable. They could set up an office at home. Other people, their office was their bedroom and they shared a house with like 5 other people. Other people had kids around since schools were closed and they couldn't get childcare at home. So a bunch of different situations that created tensions. I think from a security perspective, most of the technologies nowadays rely on single sign-on, Google, Okta, and VPN that allow you to keep your system secure.
Yeah, I was talking with Kevin Lynn. He's the CTO of Authenticate.
Mm-hmm.
They make this like really cool remote browsing product where so basically you're in Chrome and you open up another tab, but that tab is actually running on another computer.
Yep.
And he was just telling me all about like the financials industries that they work with and all the security type stuff. And I thought it was fascinating that you could open up a tab and it just be on another computer and it feel like a seamless experience.
Yes. I mean, it's been amazing to see so much technology. We've also been looking at something similar in terms of being able to do development in the cloud, mostly kind of as a workaround to the extent that you have a laptop that you can deliver to people and it's secure. And obviously, we have a bunch of software running on it. Everything's fine. But with all the backlogs and people traveling and provisioning hardware being harder, we've invested a lot in what would it take for us to trust that people can use their own computers if they need to for some period of time without being completely incapacitated and not being able to do anything. Similar technologies have been very interesting to see as internet has gone better everywhere. You can literally run an entire operating system remotely, which is really cool to see.
That is pretty neat. A lot of our community members are, startups all the way to like enterprise stuff. And I told them, I said, hey guys, I'm having a cause on from Brex and I want to know if you have any questions. And Sam wanted to know what your biggest takeaway was from scaling the engineering teams in your career.
I would say scaling, the way I've experienced scaling has been mostly through step function changes. And so a lot of times, is there a big difference between like 50 people and 80 people? Not really. Is there a big difference between like 50 people and 100 people? Yes. And most of the time, it has to deal with a few different factors. One is how large your organization is and how much breadth and depth you have in the org, because that will affect a lot of the processes and the systems you have in place to disseminate information, make decisions, and so on. The second piece is around absolute numbers. Once you reach 150 people in an org, you just don't know everybody anymore. I think this is an interesting aspect of the remote world where in the office, I would have lunch with all the new hires, especially in engineering. I would spend time with them in the beginning. And now we're doing that over Zoom, but it's so much harder to get to know people and remember people. And so it's been much harder for me to be able to know all the different folks in engineering, strengths, weaknesses, passions. And so you have to rely on the organizational systems that you've put in place. Both at Stripe and at Brex, we invested a lot in recruiting. And so I think both the bringing in people as well as onboarding them, as well as making sure they have a very good, inclusive environment has been really critical to scaling organizations. I used to spend a lot of time on recruiting and interviewing at Microsoft as well. And I've always viewed it as one of the most impactful things that you can do, no matter what your level is. Almost everybody talks about how the people that they work with is one of the most important things. Like, I love the people that I work with, or I don't. And so recruiting is the best way to kind of influence that and be part of the decision making. And then again, any process that you have, depending on how fast you scale, you have to revisit. By the time you tend to roll out a new process, you have to come up with the next version of it because the org has changed so much. You've grown, you now have multiple offices, or you're remote, or like various factors have changed that require you to take the next evolution. And chances are the next evolution will involve other people, just because you can scale by having the same people doing the same things over and over again. And so you have to be able to kind of trust people to help you scale the org.
Nice. I like that you brought up Dunbar's number of 150, because we had been, a lot of people have been asking us to like make a community because we have so many listeners, but we don't have like, or we didn't have like a community Slack or anything like that. And we ended up partnering with 7 CTOs and like taking their community concept and merging into a new company called Elevate, and we call it Elevate 150.
Nice.
.com. Yeah. And we haven't even like announced it yet on the podcast, but so we might cut this out, but yeah, we have about like 60 people, and then we were just like figuring out all the intricacies before we like make the big announcements and stuff. But when we were researching, the thing that we found with the groups is that, you know, we're part of many different groups and they get so big. So like if your group gets to like 1,000 or 10,000 people, what happens is like people start asking questions, and then there's like resentment because I've already answered that question before. I've already contributed. If you condense the community down to like 150, so we said, all right, well, let's build like houses, you know, and like name them, and we'll have these like chunks of 150 people. That way they can all form these little communities, and maybe we'll have like one channel that'll run across all of them for announcements or something. But it's really interesting as far as like structuring a large community to feel small. And I see like the same thing kind of happens in companies too, right?
Yep. No, it's fascinating the way you brought it up, because I think about some of the communities that I've been part of, and you're totally right in that as the larger they get, the harder it is to kind of make everyone happy. You have new people who are interested in the same topics that were brought up 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, and it's very valid. And at the same time, you want to keep people who've been in that community engaged. You don't want to kind of have a high level of churn. And that's very hard to do at large scale, both because it's not very personal. Like, I've been in communities that have like thousands of people, and you're like, okay, I know like 5 people, and the rest of them, like, it's very hard to get to know them. And so typically start deprioritizing those. I think within a company, it's a very good forcing function to set up tools and systems that allow you to not have to know everybody to make progress. Like, everybody knows how, when you have hard problems, you have a list of people that are like your go-to folks. And as the company gets larger and larger, you don't want to have the same people always doing the same things, and you want to kind of get new people in there. And so if you don't set those up, there's like a forcing function that makes you do it, which has been really nice to see. And the other aspect, I think, with both online communities and companies is, when you do everything on Zoom, logistically it gets very hard for everybody to participate. So I do a Q&A every month with the whole engineering org. And you still have like the level of engagement, I would say, gets to be very different than if I do meetings with like 5 people, where everybody can kind of contribute. And similarly for social events, when we're in the office, teams would go for like lunch or happy hours or like fun events to just get to bond and build empathy. And now that's very hard to do over Zoom because you can't really interact as much. You can't have multiple active speakers. You can't do things in parallel. The best thing is like you start doing breakout Zooms, but it's still not the same experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually used so we have this community call. So like every week, we get together and we have a call and we have a speaker, and then there's like 2 breakout sessions.
Hmm.
And so figuring out how to set that up correctly, like the right amount of length for a breakout room and the right people being in the breakout room together, like the composition of it. And then like if we're prompting them with questions, that's one thing where Zoom lacks. Like I can't show everyone something while they're in the breakout rooms, which makes it kind of difficult. But I definitely think maybe we'll send Harry an email. But I send him that guy's probably so sick of me. I send him like these weird suggestions of like integrate Pandora for waiting music.
That would be amazing, right? Like the
I
experience is so basic today.
right.
Like it's very reliable, which I think is the advantage, but it's very, very basic. It's just like you have some squares, one person can talk, you can have like thumbs up, thumbs down, you can mute people, and but it's basically the same stuff that honestly we've had for 5 years. It's just gotten more reliable, probably.
Yeah. And they have an app store, but the thing is like from what I understand, and I could be wrong and get a bunch of hate mail, but from what I understand, we tried to make like a custom app for the podcast on here, but it's like you would have to download like that version
Yes.
of Zoom. And so they need an app store that's like you can just experience the app when you load into my Zoom call, everyone has it, you know?
Yep. Yeah, you would want to have like a platform. It's actually quite hard to do, right? And it wasn't. I mean, if you think about that company's trajectory, is like at the beginning of the year, they were like one of many apps. It was probably one of the more popular ones, and then they just exploded overnight. And to their credit, they've invested a lot in security. They've invested a lot in stability and reliability. But in terms of the experience, it's I think miles away from where it will be in the next year or two. In general, I think that's the case for remote collaboration in general. I think with COVID, more and more companies will have many more people working remotely, even after COVID is done. And by definition, that implies that they will have to collaborate and have not just I can work on my own work and then kind of push it to a centralized thing, but also collaborate remotely. How do you do design remotely? How do you brainstorm remotely in ways that kind of mimics the experience in the office with like a whiteboard? Today, like I tried a bunch of whiteboarding apps to see if we can do it. Like they're all very bad. None of them are like, oh wow, this is great. And it's so basic if you think about it. And so I think there'll be quite a lot of evolution. I see a lot of startups trying to invest in that space coming up.
Yeah, I'm glad I wasn't the only one who failed to find like a really great whiteboarding app that had the same like feel or experience that you would have with a team.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen that. There's stuff around like how do you replicate the experience where you just turn around to someone and just talk to them so you're not isolated, but you also don't want to like let me set up a Zoom meeting with everyone all the time. There's just a lot of those. Like right now, I think we're struggling to make the in-office experience similar to the remote experience, or the remote experience closer to the in-office experience, where in fact we should be able to make it even better. Like you shouldn't have to strive to even get to that point. You should be able to say like I can make it actually better than it was in the office from many perspectives. I don't think you can do it across the board, but for day-to-day things you should absolutely be able to do that.
I think that's the future of work. It's just like a gut instinct. Like I feel like we'll end up becoming more centralized, like decentralized, because people, I don't know, most people I talk to, and this maybe because I don't live in a big city, but most people, they want to like, have some space and like be outside and experience nature and not be crammed on top of each other in a subway or something like that.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, you're starting to see already during the pandemic. I think you've seen people either relocate temporarily, some people even longer term. Some people are moving around. Like if I were in like coming out of college as an engineer, I would go and spend 3 to 6 months in various places and try it out. Like just live in different places is an amazing experience. You have that flexibility. And so I think a lot more companies will both find a value in that, and employees will find value in that, which means I think it will be accelerated. I don't think everybody will go remote. I think it will be kind of some sort of hybrid, but I think it will definitely be a much higher percentage of remote, and companies will be much more flexible. And we've already seen that most major companies have announced that they'll support people being able to move around.
I'm curious if it's going to be like an advancement on an existing technology or just something totally new out of nowhere? Because I saw the other day this, like, I think it was called Portal or something. It's this
Hmm.
like phone booth size thing where you see the 3D replication of the person and it's really like HD. Have you seen that yet? Did you see
I
that
haven't seen
article?
that one yet. No.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, so it looks like a phone booth, but the person's like in it, and they did a video of it so you can, and they walk around it and it looks like the person standing there,
That's
but they're
crazy.
not. They're broadcasting from another location.
I mean, that's you remember. I remember people using looking at like CNN when they did the hologram thing, and they would find it so funny. And now we're building more technologies that basically replicate that. I think it will be. I mean, I think some of the technologies that we use today will need to change. Like I said, Zoom will change. Um, Whiteboarding, basic apps. People will start combining tablets with their laptops. To kind of enable that. Number two, I think security will change. To your earlier point, working from anywhere implies also a higher risk. And so making sure that the company stays secure. So I think those companies will thrive. And then I do think there'll be a third bucket of things that we haven't yet figured out and will be innovative.
We'll call it the fun bucket.
Exactly.
Or
Exactly.
just
And I would like
this.
love to try them out. Like I've tried out a bunch of different, like whenever I see one that's like, oh, this is how we're thinking about solving the problem, I always try to give it a shot. Very few of them have stuck because again, I think it's very early, and it's still very traditional rather than kind of out of the box. But I do think you'll start seeing it more and more.
Yeah, it's like I know it when I feel it. Like you can tell me all about it, but when I go and experience, I can tell if it feels like genuine or artificial or if this is something that's going to scale. Like I was really, really excited about one of the 3D headsets that's actually built like in Florida. I forget the name of the company, but um, and then I was at a conference like a year or two later and I ran into them and like I got to try their prototype and put it on and I was just like, oh, so disappointed because the videos amped it up and their website and their marketing materials made it look like so 3D. And then I'm just like, this is no,
Not that.
nope, not what I thought.
Nope. I think
Yeah.
it'll, and I do think it'll take time. This is the same if you think about the, let's say, previous decade in the early 2000s. There were a bunch of technologies like tablets, smartphones, etc. That were just like ahead of their time and they just weren't great. And then towards the end of the decade is when you started seeing same technology, but just much, much better. We haven't had it as much if you think about it for this decade. Like I'm trying to think what was in the beginning of the decade, like very basic ahead of its time, and now it's there. And I would say I would probably put remote software like has improved. Back in the day, I think you had a bunch of different, like when I was at Stripe, we went through like 3 different companies to do video conferencing. And all of them were bad until we stopped on Zoom. Um, but other than that, I don't think anything has really. I wouldn't. I can't think of a technology. I'm like, oh, that's really changed a lot in the last decade, and now it's the right time. So I think chances are it'll be in the next few years that happens.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk in 10 years and we'll be like, oh, it was right
Exactly.
in front of us.
Exactly. I mean, it looks so basic afterwards, right? Like when you think about it, back in the day, it was like, oh, you have a like a pen that you use on your phone, and that's like really cool. And then you're like, no, that's like, why would you want to use that? That's not natural at all. You should use your fingers. You should multi-touch. It was just like the technology wasn't there at the time to be able to do that. And it did the same thing, which is it replicated the previous experience. Like if you think about smartphones, I would say it was mostly like what you had on a normal like operating system with a stylus to kind of help click, and everything else was very, very basic. And so of course that didn't really pick up.
One of the questions we had from David in our community, he wants to know what it's like working with the CEOs and founders that have had like a lot of success, maybe from a young age, and what
Mm-hmm.
was it like with you getting to work with them?
Yeah, I would say it's both extremely rewarding and extremely challenging. I would say in both cases. So I joined Stripe when Patrick and John were in their early 20s. I joined Brex when Pedro and Enrique were in their early 20s. I think now like Patrick and John are very clearly have made a mark already on the world, and I think Pedro and Enrique are behind on that and getting started. But I would say because they're so young in general, what they have are the right instincts. They don't have the experience because they haven't done it right, and so they hire people with experience around them. But they never. The thing that I've always appreciated about them is one, they don't take no for an answer. Like in general, any problem can be solved, and so they will always push on doing more, better, different. And then the second thing is that conventional rules don't really apply. Like in both cases, from my experience and having chatted with folks at other companies with amazing founders, they all go in an area that's been like traditionally in a certain shape with certain problems, and they solve them very differently. And everybody tells them in the beginning you can't do it, and generally they prove them wrong. And I would say when you work for them, it's the same thing, because your experience will tell you this is how we should do things, and then their instinct tells them when to push back or when to do something differently, and that's where you learn. So that's, I think, the rewarding part, is to see how thinking out of the box and thinking much more creatively can help solve problems better than the kind of traditional way of solving problems.
For sure. Yeah. It's like I like the bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. They're just like relentlessly ambitious. It reminds me of like when I was in my early 20s, right?
Yeah.
Like anything was possible. And that's so important too, because there were always people that are like pessimistic that'll sit there and look at you in your age bracket and in ones above and below you, and they'll just be like naysayers. But when you have that drive and you go through and you gain all that experience, look back, you're like, there was so much I didn't know, but you did it. But you got there and you achieved it and you overcame, and everyone else is just in their same position still saying things aren't possible.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I would say they're externally optimistic. They're optimistic about where the world is going to go. They're optimistic about what changes can happen in the world, and then internally pessimistic. Like they're very hard on themselves. They always focus on what could have been better, differently. They don't focus so much on celebrating the wins, but much more so internally on celebrating failures and kind of learning from them. But again, if you take like a longer term time frame and a more like external perspective, in general, like everything can be better, everything can be different. We can remove all these limitations; they don't matter. But they're very, very hard on themselves, and they're generally very hard on people around them because they hold people to the same bar, and they know that in order for them to be successful, everybody around them has to also get up leveled and be at that bar.
I'm smiling because my team's on the call. I'm like, what are they going to say after this? I just beat myself up, by the way. I did a podcast and it's like, it was a big one. So I was like wanting to make sure it like went well and everything. And right, I come into the podcast and we had a power cycle on our machines and like my teleprompter stopped working. It's like, I can't see their face or notes or like call anything about it or a clock or anything. And it just like, if it could go wrong, it went wrong. And after the call, I was like, guys, that was the worst. I was like, immediately, I was like into a Zoom call. And I was just like, guys, I just completely screwed this up. That was like the worst thing I've ever done. And they're like, it really wasn't that noticeable from the outside.
Yep.
But I was like, unacceptable.
I think that's the thing, right? You have a very hard bar for yourself. And like, also, if you think about like this is your baby. And then for them, their companies are their baby. And they will like, everything they do is optimizing for that. And so of course you always have to figure out like, how do you grow and how do you learn while at the same time just appreciating the things that go well. It's my personality is the same way. Like if someone gives me a compliment, I kind of brush it off easily. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. Or it's not me, it's the team. And in general, like I genuinely believe that. And whenever things fail, I'm always very introspective. What could I have done better? How could I have set up people better for success? What should we do differently? If we repeat this, would I have done anything differently? And sometimes I'm like, I would have done the same things. Why? Okay, let's go back and look. What would it have taken to do something differently? And at the end of the day, like people tell me that like, oh, but you seem very hard on yourself and you don't appreciate the things that are going well and kind of celebrate those things as well. And I do think at large scale, it's important to do that. And it's important to kind of lead with optimism. And so one of the engineering values that we have here is pragmatic optimism, and being thoughtful about all the details, of course, and like things go well, things that don't go well, but in general, trying to have a positive outlook and trying to move things forward. It's very easy to kind of like say, no, we can't do this, shut it down. But it's much harder to say like, okay, I don't think this is quite right, but let's make it better. Because that is really the hard part. It's very easy to kind of critique and throw stones at things, but it's very hard to make progress.
Yeah, it's way easier to like tear things down or say no than it is to build them up.
Exactly.
You know, I was reading an article about Brex, about the scientific method, them using the scientific method, that kind of being part of the culture. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's we have a blog series called Building Brex. The goal of it is to basically have folks within the company kind of provide more transparency externally on how we operate, and how we've actually gone through the different challenges and scale. So that's a post by Zach, I believe, our head of product. And Zach is interesting. So Zach and I work really close together. I lead engineering, he leads product, and I am very much in the more like tweaking kind of mentality. So I make small changes. Let's tweak this. Let's tweak that, and that's how you make incremental changes for progress. Zach is very much in the like, let's move the pendulum a lot and swing it left and right quite broadly, and then eventually we'll get there faster. And so sometimes we apply his way, sometimes we apply my way. It's quite a good complement, I think, for the organization. But in general, both of our mentality is one, engineers do really well with metrics. As long as they have a clear metric, they will optimize it really well. You want to increase a number, they will do it. You want to decrease a number, you will do it. What's important is that you choose the right number, because otherwise you optimize on the wrong things. And so we spend most of our time trying to think about, for each team, where is their North Star? So as a company, for example, we have 4 company North Star metrics, and different teams will contribute to each of those metrics. And we make sure that we clarify exactly, okay, for this team, that is your North Star metric. You're closest aligned to that. And then we take the next level. It's like, okay, how are you going to drive that metric? Like, what is your team's North Star metric? And then obviously you have sub metrics that kind of contribute to that. And so someone can focus on number of users, someone can focus on volume, someone can focus on losses, someone can focus on manual work and automating that. There's a few different kind of things that all come together to make Brex successful. And a lot of our time is spent on how do we make sure that the teams have those right metrics in place. And when they don't is when we've made organizational changes. So some of the things that he mentioned in the post are tied to how we've restructured the teams to kind of better align with those goals. And we notice those problems when teams struggle to make decisions or to prioritize. They're like, well, should I do X or Y? And the reality is teams struggle to make a decision between X and Y for one of 2 reasons. One, they don't have enough context to know which one's more valuable. That's generally the case in larger companies. In smaller companies, people have a lot of context. At Brex, we're like super transparent. So that generally isn't the problem. The second then problem is X and Y are very different. They're measuring very different things. So they don't know how to equate the two. So for example, if I say, should you drive revenue or should you drive number of accounts? Like, I don't know necessarily how to make that decision if I don't have a good framework in place. And so that's when things get escalated, and then we kind of have to step in to make a decision. And so every time that happens, we kind of look back and you're like, okay, is that an exception because no system is perfect? Or is that something that's more systemic and we should make any changes to either the metrics or to the team goals, structure, et cetera, to have more clarity there? Like our goals in order to scale the company has been to set up autonomous teams that can make the decisions on their own and kind of operate pretty independently. And that's been a big part of the like scientific method, is just like using goals and metrics to guide teams rather than focusing on like exactly what projects you're going to work on, exactly the deliverables, because over time you're going to learn new things and you're going to want to adjust those roadmaps.
Where did you guys get the North Star thing from?
I don't know if it was from any place. In general, like I've always thought about engineering organization having a North Star vision, a North Star direction, that's kind of like longer term guiding principle, guiding structure, guiding values, whatever. And so we kind of did the same thing with metrics. And most companies, if you think about it, have company metrics. Like most companies will say, like our company, like things that we care as a company, what we cover in all hands meetings, that the executive team reviews, whatever, they tend to have a few of those. If they have too many of those, typically they struggle because it's too granular and you can't track all of it. But what I think most companies struggle with is how to tie in the team's work to those goals. And so a lot of times I've gotten feedback, or I've given feedback when I've been in on various teams in the past, of like, how does my work really move the needle to those metrics? Like, I know how my team's impact is in terms of like, here's the projects that I've delivered and it will move this metric, but how does it really move that metric? And then most people tend to then get to revenue and say, well, all the things that we're doing eventually brings in more business. And revenue, I think, is kind of like an output rather than a direct goal. Because if you directly want to move just revenue, there's different ways to do that. And so, of course, over time, more customers result in more revenue. But there's different ways to kind of move that metric. So internal, I tend to not optimize for that and try to find the other metrics that eventually then lead into revenue.
Okay, what are those types of metrics?
So, for example, we have active users. And if you optimize for active users, then again, you're optimizing in general. If you're a company that focuses on smaller businesses, that is your measure of success. So if I think for Brex, our goal is to be the operating system for companies, the financial operating system for companies. And so we're primarily focusing on small businesses, which means the more businesses use Brex, the more likely it is that we achieve our mission and we're successful in our mission, rather than the opposite, which is you have a small number of very large customers. If you have a small number of very large customers, you're probably not going to be their operating system. You're probably not broad enough to be able to do that. And the reality is, in large companies, like enterprise level companies, you're just a drop in the bucket. And so it's much harder to achieve that. And so now if you're optimizing for the number of users, then it's like, okay, what does it take to 10x our funnel? What does it take to bring companies that are outside of tech? What does it take to lower the barrier? What does it take to not increase our losses? Okay, losses is important. So let's have that as a counter metric, because I can open the floodgate and let anybody sign up for a Brex account, but then you might lose all your money and shut down your company. And so losses becomes a problem. Great. What are other things that are preventing you from doing it? Well, manual work. Like if you have humans in the process, it doesn't scale. And so great, let's start tracking that. And so you start going from, as a company, what does the shape of success look like? What are the metrics that they kind of give you that? And then what are counter metrics that you want to keep track of to make sure that you kind of reach that in a responsible way?
Dude, that's brilliant. I love it. I love it. What are you learning? Or well, let's ask this. I'm curious to know, like, how do you disconnect? Like, you're very, very smart. You're hard on yourself, like I am. But how do you like relax away from it, or how do you reignite, like, and get some inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, this year has been quite challenging. I would say the things that give me energy are a combination of like introverted and extroverted activities. So there's times when I love just being on my own, reading, going to the movies, watch a movie. Traveling was a big thing for me and my partner. We love traveling, experiencing different places, cultures, food. Obviously, very hard to do that with COVID. And then on the flip side, I really enjoy hanging out with my friends. And so I would say I I don't do well in groups of people where like I don't know anybody's like networking level events. Like those are draining on me. But hanging out with friends has always been kind of a thing that gives me energy, and that again has been quite hard to do. But pre-COVID, I would say traveling, hiking, reading, going out with friends for like food or whatever, movies, um, exercising. Like I go running quite a lot. Yeah, I don't think anything super special, but I try to make sure that I prioritize those. It's very easy to kind of lose track of those on a day-to-day basis. Before when I had the break between Stripe and Brex, I was going to the gym every day. I was working out. I was reading a bunch. I was like, this is great. I feel great. And I kind of wanted to build that momentum. And then I was like, if I build momentum, then when I join Brex, I'll be working a lot, but I'll have it in my system. And sure enough, within a few months, like I was going to the gym like once or twice a week. I wasn't running as much because I was making up excuses. And then subsequently, then you start burning out and you start having less of a balance, and then that affects your like creativity. It's very easy to do like tactical things and check off boxes, but taking a step back, thinking about the bigger picture, thinking about longer term things, more creative work, those are very, very hard to do. This year, for example, I think it's been very hard for me to get into writing. So before I used to write internally, I would write docs, memos. I had a bunch of blog posts drafted, and it's been so hard to get to write stuff. I have for the Building Brex blog, I have 2 posts that I've been writing for like now 2 months. And I just can't get myself to like get into that mode to just sit down, write, and have the words come out.
It's a tough. Whenever I'm developing a new discipline, I stack it as the first thing I do in the morning, right? So,
Are you more of a morning
because
person or evening person?
naturally I am an evening person, but with kids, I have to be a morning person.
Yep.
So I wake up like 5, go for a run, make myself breakfast, wake the kids up, and be a part of that routine. And then I go to the gym, lift, and then I go to the office and start working. So by the time I'm starting working, like, I've already been up for 3 or 4 hours and have like accomplished some stuff. But I started to take piano
Nice.
and put that in place of the gym because I was like really making progress there. I was like, you hit this curve where like you start out, it's like, all right, you're figuring something out, and then you start really gaining traction. So it's like, all right, I'm doing super well at the gym and I'm just starting to take off piano. I'm going to put piano as the first thing I do when I wake up. And then gym attendance just went like from 100%, like 6-7 days a week, only resting when I have to like 3 days a week. And I was like, oh no. Yeah. So I really found out that I can only like really hammer hard on one thing at a time.
Yep.
As like my first thing.
I think most people are the same way. I think the truth of the matter is everybody tries to do more things, both in their personal life and in their professional life, than they can. But what's really rewarding is when you do something really well, really exceptionally. Like to your point with gym, like you got really, really good at it. Now with the piano trajectory, I'm assuming you're probably going to do the same, and you would get really great at that. Um, and but it's different than like I'm going to do 3 things and I'll be like meh at all 3 of them. Like I'll go to the gym 3 days a week, and I'll play piano, but not really well. And like I'll go running, but not for long distances. And then like, even though you're doing more things, I don't think it's as rewarding as I'm able to kind of accomplish some ambitious goals and get those things done.
Yeah, mastery is a large driver in my life. Like I very much enjoy mastering something.
Only 10,000 hours. So
yeah, only 10,000, but man, I'm going to get like 4 or 5 things before I die. Or if Musk can hurry up, come on, buddy, I might, I might be able to get a couple thousand things in and get that Neuralink and live forever.
There you go. Forever and ever.
Isn't that cool? The concept that like, I found out that there's a whole field. I found this guy, he like added me on LinkedIn, or probably one of his PR people did, right? Mm-hmm. But his whole thing was like longevity, and there's apparently a whole like culture, like a whole thing of these people that in this industry called longevity, and everything from like science research to supplements, like everything. And there is a ton of money being spent on this type of stuff. People trying to live forever, especially like some tech billionaire type people.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's 2 different paths that I've seen. One is the path of how do we make our bodies last longer, you slow the aging process and so on, like the physical aspects. And then the other one is more about like the neural ones, where basically like, well, do you really need your body to live, or is it your consciousness that needs to live forever? And this is where, like, if you go down the AI path, people believe that you can download your conscious into a computer, and then you don't even know you're there. You just believe you're in the real world, and you can live forever that way. And I think I mean, if you think about technology and the rate of change, I think in the next 10 to 20 years, it'll be incredible what we'll be able to do. Will we be able to live forever? Like, I don't know, nor do I think that's good for society for people to live forever. But I do think there's definitely something there that will gradually increase and have step function changes. I think we're kind of getting to the limit of the incremental changes that we've done through the medical system, where we've cured some diseases, and now you're like, great, you can live to like 80, 90, close to 100, but like that's not really great. What people want whenever I talk to my friends about this, they don't necessarily want to live 100. What they would want is their somewhere between their 20s and their 40s to live forever or for a much longer period of time. Like they're like, oh yeah, you're extending the end of your life where you're not able to do as many things, and so it's not as rewarding. What they would want is to be able to live like our current age for a much longer period of time, and then give up
Yes.
the years at the end. So I think that's like the medical changes and improvements that we've made as a society. I think we're more or less there. I don't think I don't think people will focus on like, how do I get people to live 110? Like, it's not a big focus, I think.
Yeah, we're on. The thing is that makes me happy is we have business models that if you extend them out, this is the result. And so whenever there's money behind something in an industry like that, it will achieve its outcome eventually. It's just a matter of time. I think we'll get especially with the CRISPRs and the editing and all the stuff that's happening now. You know, the lady that like figured out CRISPR, she said, if you would have asked me last year, I would have said we're 10 years out. And then she stumbled upon it. Right. And that opened up like a whole new world. I think if we can get it like some therapies and things so that we could live a little bit longer, and then that'll like, even if you could give me, like, if I could go get some operation or a surgery or an injection or something that kept me 40 for 25 years, just like kind of like stop that down, or maybe created a gradient that slowed me. So like it's 2-to-1. So I live twice as long from that point on. That would be fantastic, because then it would give the other technology time to catch up. So we could actually get into a more like a state where like we can be switching out our computers. Like as my body's like a computer, I could go into the computer. I could go and you go on vacation and you're actually just go into a body. Like that's the vacation, right? But I love this. I love this future. I think it's such an interesting idea, and we're actually like on trajectory for it.
Yep, I think there'll be a lot of money poured into that, because there's been so much money made in technology, and those like almost everybody will want to live longer. Like I haven't met someone that's like, no, I'm good. And I think they'll definitely invest in that. The only question is, it's always like, is it going to be there in time for me?
Yeah,
Because they
that's
might
the fear.
discover the thing where like, yep, you can take a injection or whatever, or you can take a pill every day and it slows down from that point on. But if you're now 70, then like you can't go back. I think going back is going to be very hard to do. I think more likely is to slow down.
Yeah. And yeah, if we get it when we're like 80,
Yeah.
I'd be like, I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know.
yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, at that point, like it's interesting to see, because people always like, oh, when you're young, you're like, do I really want to live like that? But when you're in that age and like you have your family, your kids, your grandkids, like you want to be around them. People
That's
cling on
true.
to life for a long time, I think. So I think at anybody will take it.
Yeah, that is true, because especially with my general like demeanor, like I believe my attitude. I think I don't ever feel older really. So I think that when I'm that age, as long I see these older people and their minds are so sharp, and talking to them, it's like you could be talking to a 40-year-old, but they're clearly like in their late 70s or
Yes.
something. And they're running around, driving, playing tennis. And I'm like, whoa, like that's who I want to be. That's why I care so much about my health and yeah.
100%. Like one, it's your brain. Like you'll meet older people who are super sharp and they're on top of everything, and then you meet other people who clearly are struggling, and at that point, I think it's like that's the highest order bit for me. Like if I'm in a state where I'm no longer sharp, then I don't think it's worth it. And then the second one is taking care of your body, and the reality is it's not going to be the things that you do when you're in your 70s that are going to help you be healthy. It's the things you're doing now to be healthier in your 70s. So a lot of people by then, it's just too late to figure it out.
For sure. Let's end this on a positive note, though.
Exactly. Living forever.
What are you really excited about? It could be personal life, work life. What are you pumped up about right now?
Well, I'm pumped up about the vaccine. Like I think even the most optimistic people didn't think we're going to be able to get to that in like a year. I think this is again shows you when science and technology really puts their mind together and goes towards a big dream, then they're able to do it. And so I'm quite excited about that. I am quite excited personally about the holidays and kind of being able to kind of like decompress a bit. And then work-wise, next year for us at Brex, it's going to be a huge year in terms of expanding to small businesses across the U.S. And that's one of the reasons why I joined Brex, is being able to kind of get the product in the hands of as many businesses as possible and helping these small businesses. I'm a really big believer in like small businesses driving the economy. And so I'm quite excited about that. And I think, again, next year, these small businesses will need all the help they can get.
For sure. 100%. And I love the product and we use it. And I'm grateful that you had it when it first came out. Like I couldn't rent a car, for the business because they had to have a credit card. And I was like, oh man, I personally at the time, I didn't even have a credit card because I was like, I didn't
you don't
use
need
one.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I was so excited when our VC firm like connected us with somebody at Brex and they're like, hey, check it out. Are you doing anything interesting? Or I know we're wrapping up. We've got time.
Sure.
We're at time here, but I was just curious. Are you doing any interesting like contests or anything with your teams around the holidays?
We just did a white elephant with my leadership team, and then every team is kind of doing their own thing. Some are doing like white elephant, some are doing Secret Santa. But next year, I think everybody is very excited to be able to see each other, have some offsites, and get like I've talked to some of the people who basically have never met majority of their teammates because we've hired them this year and it's only been on Zoom. And I think people are quite excited about that.